Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the art and science of social media. I'm Tika Newton. I'm the Membership and Domestic Policy Manager for Climate Action Network. And we're really happy today to have a couple of the movement's greatest social media experts joining us to give us some training. Before we get started, before I introduce everyone, just a little bit of orientation to the platform in case Zoom is new to you. There's a Q&A button down in the bottom of your toolbar. So if you just hover your cursor over the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A feature. And yeah, Nathan's just reminding me that people are just starting to join. So I'm going to go over this a couple of times. But while people are joining, just in case you're not familiar with the Zoom platform, you can ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. You can also post questions into the chat, and we'll be taking the questions at the end. So I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes for people to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, looks like our participants are joining here. I think we can get going. So again, welcome everyone to today's webinar on the art and science of social media. I'm Tika Newton, the Membership and Domestic Policy Manager for Climate Action Network Canada, and we're joined today by How-Sen Chong and Trevor Melanson, two of the movement's foremost experts on social media. If you have questions, we're going to do all of the question and answer at the end. So you can post your questions into the Q&A feature by hovering over the bottom of your screen, or you can post them in the chat, and I will be keeping track of those as we go. So I'll introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to hand it over to them. So we have How-Sen Chong with us. He's our main presenter today. How-Sen has been an environmental activist for nearly 20 years and has been using digital media tools with NGOs and political campaigns for nearly that long. He's formerly with the Sierra Club and the Sierra Club of Canada's Youth Climate Movement, and he recently served as the Canadian digital campaigner at Stand.Earth. How-Sen holds degrees from McGill and Yale, and he recently moved back to his hometown of Toronto. Trevor Melanson is the communications manager for Clean Energy Canada. Before that, he worked as a journalist for a decade, including managing the digital strategies of Canadian Business, BC Business, and Vancouver magazines. And Trevor will be joining partway through the webinar to give a little intro to Facebook and how to use Facebook appropriately. So I'm going to hand it over now to How-Sen, who will lead us through about a 60-minute presentation. And then we'll do question and answer after that.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us and for listening to me. Hopefully you will come across and come back home with a lot of interesting information. Hopefully a new way of looking and a new and more effective way of looking at how you do digital campaigning. I, as said before, I'm a climate campaigner and a digital expert. A lot of branding people kind of tell you not to say that you're two things at once, but I'm going to do it anyways. I have over 15 years of experience in climate, working for not-for-profits, working in politics, and also working in the private sector. Bunch of organizations I've worked with. That includes the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. That's where I did my master's degree, where we looked at how people respond to climate messages. And I have environmental degrees from McGill and Yale and certified a GHG inventory accountant. I am in Toronto. This is Treaty 13 territory with, Treaty 13 is with the Mississaugas of the Credit. It's the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas, the Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat. I'm a kid of immigrants, so one of the things that I learned was, like, as people on someone else's land, you always bring your own perspective and bring your own value, but you have to respect those who come before you. And so the acknowledgement obviously is an admittedly small action, but it's important for me to remind myself every day of the real history of the place that I'm at. And so we as settlers have erased a lot of that history. And so this is at least a very small action to recognize that. Obviously where you are at, depending on where you are in Canada is going to be different. But that's where I am at here in Toronto. What we're going to learn today are three general things. We're going to go over the foundations of digital campaigning, elements of digital campaigning, and also we're going to go through digital tools. There's some drilling outside my door, so let me know, please, in the chat, or if somebody could let me know if that's too bothersome. But across the street, they are doing some construction, so I apologize for that sound problem. So first and foremost, we're going to go over some basics. I would like to go over the basics because it's important to understand how quickly the world has changed in terms of tech. And that if you think of technology a particular way, or like me, sometimes think of lock yourself in a particular era of technology, you can miss things down the road. I'm going to illustrate that to you with Tech Trends timeline. Here's a timeline. This is most of my life. I was born in 1979, to give you some idea. Right now we're in 2019. And to give you an idea of how fast things have changed. Back in the 1980s, about 8% of US households had a computer, and a cell phone would cost $3,000 of today's money. And could only make phone calls. And then by the 1990s, we start seeing the internet come down. So a lot more US households have a computer, widespread adoption of the internet, and then texting is invented. So people start texting as well. But at the time, there was the average American only sent about 0.4 texts every single month. That was in 1995. In the aughts, the early 2000s, we start seeing the introduction of smartphones. The iPhone came out in 2007. We start seeing for the first time laptops outselling desktops. We start seeing broadband internet as well. So suddenly people can get internet a lot faster for the same amount of cost. And so they could get data a lot faster. I'm sorry. And then we can also see that camera phones start becoming a thing. And in the mid-2000s, or the mid-aughts, sorry, in the mid-aughts, it was a rise of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So the first person to reach 1 million Twitter followers, what happened in 2009, and Facebook ad spending reached about $750,000 in 2009. And at the end of that decade, there was about 20 hours of YouTube video that was uploaded on YouTube every minute. Fast forward to this decade, we suddenly see cell phones are surpassing landline use. We see that mobile website visits are surpassing desktop visits. And we see that there's a rise of user-created photo and video as camera phones and video becomes a lot cheaper. As of this year, the top 3 Twitter accounts now have over 100 million followers. So it took 10 years to go from one person reaching 1 million to 3 people reaching 100 million. So that gives you an idea as to how many people have over 1 million followers now. Facebook ad spending has reached $55 billion, and now there's 500 hours of YouTube video uploaded every minute. Compare that to the decade before where there was only about 20 hours. And so things are rapidly changing. Some of these stats really actually did surprise me when I looked at it, because once again, I have my mind of where digital stats are somewhere locked in around 2009 and 2010. And so that's a good reminder for all of us that that it's important sometimes to keep up to date. Digital media has changed 2 things about how we consume media in particular. The first is interactivity, right? It's rather than conventional media being a one-way communication, digital media is now a two-way medium. that's something a lot of us maybe have learned in circa 2000. One thing we weren't really prepared for, we didn't really learn about the two-way communication as much reading Time magazine articles, is that interactive actions can actually be trackable. So now with digital media, we're able to track interactions and learn more about how those interactions increase sales, engagement, increase donations, and of course, can skew political campaigns as well. The other way that digital media has changed things is that it's actually warped space and time. So not like a Star Trek way, obviously, but what it basically means is people can consume video, audio, and text when and where they want. They don't have to go to the library, they don't have to go anywhere, they have to just go on Google and search. What that also means is that things can go, pictures and articles and videos can go viral again and again, or if people are missing something, they can go back and find it. And so on the right is a graph that's showing website traffic. I wrote an article that went viral several years ago, and you can see that like it continues to go viral after absolutely zero promotion from me. So that's just something that occurs over time. So that gives you an idea that like what you put online can come back over and over and over to haunt you, and to, as Justin Trudeau is finding out right now. So we can see all these things happening at once. It's how digital media has actually changed the world. There's several reasons why it's actually occurred. One of the main reasons is cost. The financial costs for most technology and services have gone down. That means that like there's more, not just the technology is cheaper, but there's more technologists in the field. So there's more people who could actually manipulate those technologies, understand how to work those technologies. But with the lower cost, it also means that there's greater competition, so that there's far more noise out there. On the right, you can see a chart that's the decline and fall, the cost and speed of computation for internet connection speeds, disk drive prices, and average transistor prices. One thing to notice is that this is actually a log scale and not a linear scale. So if you know the difference between a log scale and linear scale, you'll know that these lines are actually way more steep in a linear scale by far. So that gives you an idea as to how quickly the costs are going down. Another trend that's happening is portability. Generally, computing is becoming more portable. Most of us already know that. One of the things to recognize is that except for screen size and raw processing power, smartphones are actually, in many cases, more functional than desktops in usefulness for people, because there's also a camera, you can text, and there's GPS stuff in there. And so what that means is that all those things people can use to interact with the real world, and a lot of that kind of stuff can be tracked as well. And so a lot of the tracking you can do through like Facebook advertising, for example, you can track people who are in a particular area just by the fact that Facebook is tracking your GPS and where you're going. One thing also that's changed is searchability and sharing. Unlike with traditional media, the internet gives people this ability to search for exactly what they want, what they're looking for. But it also means that they can share. So they can share and they can search and find their particular people. So it means that it's easier for us and environmentalists to find our particular people, but what it also means is that there's an increase in echo chambers. And so one of the reasons why some of us are surprised when Brexit is voted in, for example, is because we ourselves are locked into our own echo chambers and oftentimes don't have access to the media that people in other echo chambers are actually seeing. And so there's a balkanization of messaging that's going on out there. One of the main things also is happening is going from text to video, because the digital storage costs are coming down. More and more people are communicating with video and with images rather than what I grew up with, which is mostly writing and text. That also means that there's greater competition from amateurs for a user's limited amount of screen time. One of the YouTubers that I watch is Marques Brownlee. The top screenshot is his very first video. He's a YouTube tech reviewer. The top is from his first video from January 2009. 10 years later, he's interviewing Bill Gates. I've seen figures that shows that he makes about $40,000 a month every single time on YouTube, on YouTube. So 40,000 a month, which is quite a bit of money. So there's a couple takeaways to understand about these trends. More people have access to what I would call campaigning tools than ever before, and it's in their pockets, right? So communicating with people, broadcasting people, taking photos and videos and showing those to people. So a lot more people have access to those tools. And as a result, there's a lot more noise to compete with. And the other thing to understand is that it's easier than ever to find your people, especially with things like social media now also splitting groups into interest areas. But it also means that it's harder to see what echo chambers are talking about. And it can also take us by surprise because a lot of folks in the environmental sphere, for example, are within similar echo chambers. And so a lot of stuff may surprise us when it comes down the pipe. So when I put this presentation together, I thought that what I wanted to do is talk more about the process, and then we can go into some more details about the tools. And the reason why I want to talk about process is because a process is used to choose which digital tools to use with your scarce resources. There are lots of digital tools out there, and we have to make sure that when we're using digital tools that we ask the correct questions. A lot of people in organizations may be familiar with these types of questions. I know I've asked these questions before, like how many people are on an email list? How many likes did a post get? How much did something cost for a new contact? Say, or like how many people shared it? And all these types of questions are important to ask. But if you don't have a strategy behind there, then these are what a lot of people call vanity metrics, right? It's like more and faster and cheaper are not strategies. They're metrics, absolutely. But what we should actually be asking are details to which those questions actually answer. So it's not how many people are on our email list, it's like how many actually interact with your work. If you have a giant email list, but only a small percentage interacts with your work, it might be better to have a smaller email list with a larger percentage of those people who are actually interacting with your work. How many likes did something get? Well, did the post actually contribute to your theory of change? Did it actually contribute to what it is that you're trying to change in the world? How much did it cost for each contact? Are you reaching the right people and engaging the right people at this price point, right? Just getting a contact might not be the thing that you need the person to do. Maybe you actually need them to engage in a particular way, in which case the price per contact may actually go up, because those who do clicktivism are far more numerous than those who are willing to go to an event, for example. So if you're actually like an organization that wants people to go to events, pure cheap numbers in terms of ads, like people coming in per click when you do your ad spend, for example, is not necessarily the right metric. And then how many people shared it? Does sharing actually contribute to your goals or not, right? So a lot of people on Facebook, for example, they'll go for pure engagements. I worked with a client recently that said, oh, we're going to go for pure engagements to talk about this particular environmental policy. But if you go for pure engagements, what you're also doing is you're encouraging a lot of people to troll the site, because Facebook doesn't make a difference between somebody who's trolling and somebody who's positive, right? And so sometimes engagement isn't exactly what you're looking for. That's why it's important to understand what your back strategy is, what your strategy is for everything. So another way to look at a digital strategy of more and cheaper is spam and clickbait. That's basically what spam and clickbait is. They go for volume, they go for more, they go for as cheap contacts as possible. And as a result, that causes many problems from the user's end. And it can lead to pretty damaging things like having your emails blacklisted onto the internet. So that means that like people won't be receiving your emails, for example, if you go for a more spamming model of digital campaigning or digital engagement. So we're going to go a little bit into setting your digital goals. Your digital strategy should be linked to a goal that you are trying to achieve. So once again, it's not about more or better. It's not about more or faster. It's not about cheaper. It's about better. It's all about doing it better and smarter. So generally speaking, you should have your goal, and then you have multiple calls to actions. And then with those calls to actions, you should be using tools to drive those particular calls to action, right? So for example, if our goal is, if we get 100 people to this event, council will pass this bike law. This is an example. Your calls to action could be getting people to an event, asking donors to help fund tools and organizers, and engaging with councils to make sure that they actually will do what it is that you hope that they'll do. And then with these calls to action, then around those, you can build various tools and strategies. So in order to get people to the event, you may want to use Instagram and YouTube to tell stories about the people who are going to go to the event, so that will entice more people to show up. You may want to create a phone tree to remind people of the meeting a week in or 2 days in before the meeting actually occurs. You may want to create an event on Facebook and get people there, right? To ask donors to help, you may want to do things like make a video of volunteers asking for donations, or you may want to use your database to identify lapsed donors and ask them to donate. You may want to identify people in your databases of people who've already taken actions on cycling to go in and ask those donors for help. And ways to engage with council. You may want to build an email to target tool so you can get activists to actually send direct emails to the council, or you may want to get campaigners to meet with council members. It's a mix of these digital tools and conventional tools that will get you to meeting your particular goal. And once you've mapped something like this out, you can add alternate strategies and tools, like mini or sub strategies and tools to do that, right? So under creating a Facebook event, you may want to tell your supporters over email and social media to share that event. And that's a social media strategy for which there are many tools that exist. You can get ally organizations to share an event on the channels. And that's a mix of kind of conventional strategy, which is coalition building, along with the digital strategy of utilizing other organizations' pre-existing support lists to get folks in. For an email to target tool, if you've created an email to target tool, you can ask your followers to spread the tool on social media. You can ask everyone who's RSVP'd for the event to remind council members that they'll actually be at the event by using that email to target tool. You can send the action as a Facebook ad using something like a lookalike audience. And so what a lookalike audience is that you can take people from your existing list, people who already engage, put it in Facebook, and the algorithm will find people who look like that. And when it does that, it tends to dramatically increase the engagement and decrease the cost per engagement. So generally, there are three things a digital strategy or a tool can do. And the main things, these three things fall under, everything falls under one or several of these three categories. It can either help you find your audience and supporters and identify them and understand them. It can help engage your people to take action or donate. And it can help you show your audience about your issue or something about your work. A lot of digital strategies and tools can do more of one of these things at the same time, and often do. So for find, it is what is the audience that you need to achieve for your theory of change? So as you're putting together your plan and your goal, who is it that I need to engage? Oftentimes what environmental groups will do is like, oh, we just need to engage our supporters. And the question I have to you is that, like, what do you count as a supporter? And are there other ways that you can engage with these supporters, right? And so, or there are other audiences. And so there are your activists, but you might want to send an ad about wildfires to opponents. So basically people in Facebook who don't believe in climate change or believe in like right-wing things, for example, you may want to send a message saying like, hey, an inoculation message about, hey, forest fires are actually happening, floods are actually happening, there's an issue here. With the activists, you can break down your activists based off of how far they've gone up your ladder of engagement, or how low or how what types of actions they've actually taken. So with a good database, you'll be able to see, hey, this activist has taken 3 or more of our online actions. So we think they're a pretty strong supporter. So we're going to maybe do a Facebook lookalike audience of people who look like that. And then hopefully we'll get more people who will join up to our petitions. Or perhaps what we'll do is send a donation ask to those people if they haven't received one already. You can also, your audience might be journalists, right? So maybe finding digital strategies to engage with journalists, to find those journalists and engage with them as well. Policymakers, donors. When you are very clear about who it is your audience is, and how that audience and group of people is going to help reach your goals, then everything kind of comes down from that. So this is one of the most important aspects of putting together a digital plan. So some examples, you can use engagement tools to obtain email addresses and textable phone numbers from social media followers. And so this means that when people sign up for an event, you may have their phone number, so you can text them saying, hey, at some point you signed up for an event, we want to remind you that this event is coming up, just to boost numbers for that event, for example. You can send social media ads that bring viewers to engagement pages. You can use online tools like Cision and Meltwater, or like Twitter lists, to find journalists who might write about your issue. And so you can either send them direct conversations or direct communications, or you can also get your people and your activists to engage with those people as well. You can also use websites like Open Parliament and government websites to find contact information of politicians and non-political government decision makers, and figure out ways to engage with those folks using digital tools. And some of those tools will be kind of like these mass tools, which get a lot of people to email somebody. Some of them might be, click to call tools. We're going to go into those tools a little bit later on, because they're all engagement tools. So the main aspect of engagement is, what do you want your audience to do to meet your theory of change? So whereas the first one is finding that audience, the second step is figuring out what is it that you actually want them to do. And so we'll go back to here. This will remind you of this process that we've already gone through just earlier. And then here I just have a whole group of different types of engagement actions and strategies. There are multiple tools for a lot of these, so I'm not going to go too deeply into the tools at this part of the presentation. We'll go deeper into tools later on. But this gives you an idea as to like, what is it that you can actually do to get people to engage, and to engage with people and get them to actually do something that will help you reach your particular goal. And then once you have figured out who it is that you want to talk to, how you want them to engage, then you need to figure out what is it that you want to show them. And there's multiple types of showing. There's education, calls to action, report back. And you can also show what you did to your donors and supporters, right? So these are all different kinds of showing. I'm going to show you a video that kind of that does a pretty good job touching in on most of these. This is done by 350 in Portland.
27 fossil fuel export facilities have been proposed in the Northwest, and the cumulative carbon impact of that is apocalyptic.
We're here today to support the City Council of Portland in passing the nation's strongest resolution opposing new fossil fuel infrastructure.
We're kind of at the culmination of a decade of anti-fossil fuel activism.
work that's been done has come straight from the grassroots. Lots of credit is due all around the board from activists taking direct action and then involving themselves in the public process.
You can really make a change here.
The City of Portland has the opportunity to lead the charge in the inevitable energy revolution.
We, as the future generation, hope that you will be our heroes of tomorrow.
Roll call vote, please.
Aye.
Cities can lead. Aye.
I vote aye.
Aye. I am really proud to be a Portlander, and I'm really proud to preside on this city council. Aye.
Portland City Council just voted unanimously to oppose new fossil fuel infrastructure.
So you see that video does touch on a lot of it. It educates people about what the issue is. There's multiple calls to action, including the last bit where it's asking like what other cities are next or what other cities are going to do this. It's basically a report back showing people what they did, right? So it's throughout the campaign, it literally shows the actual city council meeting where they did the vote right inside. So it really covers pretty much all of these aspects extremely well within 90 seconds. And you'll notice that a lot of the video isn't professional video. It's done off of phone cameras. It's all about planning and figuring out what your particular goal is. So if your particular goal is, we want city councils to ban fossil fuel projects, then what they've done is they've been able to show that through all their work and utilizing the lowest cost and the portability of the videos and like cell phone cameras and like basically getting their volunteers, their activists to get engaged. They've created this fantastic video that does a really good job of talking about this entire campaign within just a 90-second view. Yeah, I'm going to skip that one because that slide is out of place. We're going to go into some digital tools right now and some specific digital tools. First, we're going to go into CRMs and talk a little bit about CRMs. You'll notice here that I have the find, engage, and show piece here. And it's to talk a little bit. So the highlighted white one here is find. CRMs primarily are about helping you understand and find your people. A CRM is actually a database. A lot of people, your organization will just simply call this your database. It's basically a database of your contacts and supporters. And what it does is it tracks your organization's interactions with your supporters. CRMs really originally come from the sales world, when you had salespeople trying to track all the conversation they've been having with people in order to build them up what they call the sales ladder. In the NGO world, that's kind of what we call a ladder of engagement, for example. And so the software in many respects is similar to the sales software, and some of the first CRMs environmental organizations and NGO use were heavily based off of these sales software groups. So if you have a development department, for example, they're probably using a CRM if you're a largest organization by Canadian standards. Common CRM uses in NGOs is to track conversations with major donors and foundations. You can also use them to track actions taken by your community, if they've showed up for an event, all that type of stuff. CRMs can be very automated and can be very labor intensive. So it depends on the CRM that you use, and it depends on what kind of experience that you have and whether or not you've built in the connections with the online engagement tools into your CRM, the online event planning tools within your CRM. And those are all things that a good digital strategist will help you put together. So that basically goes over a lot of what CRMs can do for you. And so here's some examples of using CRM. A local environmental organization can use a CRM to track membership dues. Social enterprise can use a sales CRM to track phone calls and emails with a major client. environmental justice organization can use CRM to see which of its activists signed its most recent petitions. Conservation organization could use a CRM to track conversations with major foundations. Legal fund can use a CRM to track online donations. It's basically a database that's connected with a bunch of your systems. And so they come in different shapes and sizes. Some of them are primarily about member and donor management, but most of them are starting to like come together. So the online engagement, the email engagement are starting to, you can start seeing them in these other CRMs as well, because all these CRMs are starting to compete with one another. One of the ones that's kind of unique that isn't in the private sector, but it's unique to the online, the activist space and the NGO space are these online engagement ones. The engaging networks, the action kits, the action networks, the Blue State Digital. These are about seeing which of your supporters have taken a particular petition action or done a particular, gone to a particular event. And a lot of these online engagement ones will actually include the ability to not just email your folks, but also create petitions and things like that as well. If you're looking to do this, if you're looking to upgrade your existing CRM, there's a bunch of things, skills you should be looking for. There's database management, spreadsheet management, logic and problem solving, Boolean logic. These are skills to manage a CRM and to manage the data behind the CRM. In order to design the CRM, you're actually going to need an actual proper designer who understands how to put together websites and detailed website work. A lot of you are also familiar with email lists. Email lists, you find, you mostly engage or you show people what's happening. And so what that means is you primarily use emails to invite your audiences to engage with your calls to action. Also, you can use emails to show your audiences the work that you've done. A mass email list really isn't built to find people, but you can find out, but you can also, you can use your mass email list to get your people to engage in actions that will give you more information about them. So you can ask them to, do a survey, for example, and you can track those survey results in the CRM. So you can see, hey, this particular person is interested more in tree conservation, and this person is more interested in animal protection. This person is more interested in climate, and you can see that by finding out different engagement processes and strategies in order to get them to give you that information. A good mass emailer will actually do several things, not just email stuff for you, but it should be doing delivery optimization, reduce the likelihood that your emails goes into spam folders. It should be doing analytics, and it should be integrated with your CRM as well, because click-throughs and reads are one of the key basic metrics that you can tell whether or not someone on your list is engaging with your work or not. So here are some primarily email-heavy CRMs, email lists, also list CRMs. So these kind of fall in that category of also a little CRM-y, but they're primarily built on sending emails out. And so while you can still, for some of these, do some audience segmentation, they're not as powerful in terms of audience segmentation and audience information as some of those other CRMs that I've shown before. And the skills you should be looking for like doing emails, obviously there's writing, there's HTML, CSS for email layout design, basic graphic design skills, Boolean search logic for when you're doing mass email sends. These are and or nots. It's like send everybody who has seen this particular thing but not donated yet a particular email. And ask them to donate to this campaign. Like that's one way you can use Boolean logic to target specific people. And interest in testing and stats as well. engagement tools. This is where we're going to get into some, I know a lot of people are interested in understanding engagement tools. Digital engagement tool allows you to engage with your supporters and allows you to ask your supporters to engage. And I'm going to go over 3 of them. And Trevor's going to go over their experience with Facebook. But I'm going to go over very briefly New Mode and Call Hub right now. New Mode is actually a Canadian organization. They're based originally out of Vancouver. And this gives you some of the tools that they have. So they have targeted petitions. So you can get your activists or any activists you want to send petitions to people. And so I've used targeted petitions, not necessarily in New Mode, but I've used targeted petitions to send messages to politicians, to send messages to journalists, to send messages to CEOs, to send messages to leaders of to the managers of a particular Starbucks chain or Starbucks coffee chain, right? So those are all things that you can use targeted petitions to. What it basically is that you set an email target, and then your folks come in and they can send an email in their own name to the target. And so that gives you a lot of options there. So that's what the target email is, and you can do target petitions. They can do calls as well, so you can actually do a click-to-call tool. So for example, I've had people, it's a one-click calling tool that gives them a script, and I've had them call CEOs of big banks, for example, or the mayor's office or the prime minister's office. They also do something like a tweet storm, so you can reach out to decision makers and get everybody to send out a massive tweet storm targeted towards a particular hashtag or targeted towards a particular decision maker. They have a letters to the editors tool, which is really cool, which basically what that means is you can have your activists write a letter to the editor, and the tool will send that letter to all of the newspapers in their specific area. So all the local papers, all the major national papers, if you happen to be in like London, Ontario, for example, it will be sent to all of them. And then there's also a click to fax tool as well. Some organizations only take faxes for some reason, or will read faxes more than they'll read emails. And so having a click to fax tool can be very helpful as well. So these are some of the online tools that New Mode has. One of the powerful things that New Mode has as well is they have a database of decision makers. So federal level, provincial level, municipal level decision makers, at least for most of the major cities in Canada, they give your users the ability to type in their postal code, and it will spit out the contact information on the back end of the particular decision makers in their geographic area, and they'll send an email or tweet at them or call that specific contact, which is very cool. Call Hub is actually more of a voice process. So it's a voice broadcasting system. It allows you to spread your message, but they also have a call center. So some of you may be aware of, like, for example, Lead Now oftentimes will do phoning, where they'll have volunteers phone you. A lot of these kind of like these phone engagement to voters and phone engagement to volunteers are done in a system like Call Hub. They'll also let you do scheduled text message campaigns, basically a big text broadcast, or they'll also let you do collective texting. And what a collective texting is similar to the call center, where you can have your volunteers text your list. And so say you have a list of 1,000 people that you want to get to an event with this particular tool. And there's another one that's better in Canada called Through Text. With this particular tool, you can get like say 10 or 15 volunteers to text them rather than having to do it one-on-one. So they'll be able to have back and forths and have more interaction with those folks. The more people interact, the more likely they're going to show up in the event. I'm going to hand it off now to Trevor. He's going to talk about their experience with Facebook and Facebook posts and stuff like that. So here we go.
Great. All right, I'm going to screen share here. Can you hear me okay? Is my volume fine?
I can hear you.
Great, okay. All right, so I've got the first slide up here. But first, I should talk a little bit about what Clean Energy Canada is trying to do as an organization, because our social media strategy very much is in support of that. And I think it's interesting, actually, that we're talking here because we're a little different, I think, than some other nonprofits, in that we don't consider ourselves activists necessarily, and our audience is not activists. So, you know, many nonprofits, their tactics are more grassroots. They're more micro. Ours are very macro. And it's partly, you know, on our policy side, of course, we work with governments to design climate policy. And on a communication side, obviously, we're trying to get social license for those policies. And so, you know, sorry, didn't mean to go forward here. Anyways, so, you know, we look at Canadians broadly. I'm going to kind of make up some numbers, but this is approximately right from, you know, the various millions of polls that I've seen. You have probably about a quarter of Canadians who don't believe in human-caused climate change and are at this point in time pretty much unreachable. And then you probably have another quarter of Canadians that are totally on your side. They care about climate change. Perhaps they go to strikes. They're more likely to be activists, and they're going to, you know, believe everything you say, or if anything, are going to criticize you for not being, you know, on side enough. But there's this middle, I guess I would say this middle, probably about 50% of Canadians who accept human-caused climate change, generally think we should do something about it, but also they're thinking about their day-to-day life, and, you know, they don't want to pay more, and they want whatever we do to generally be not too difficult. And, you know, we see this on social media. We see this in the focus groups that we've conducted a few of them this year. And I think one big takeaways was, you know, the frame in which, in our opinion, the frame in which we win these moderates over is safety, right? And so the status quo has this sort of default advantage in the safety frame, right? People inherently feel that the status quo is safer, even when that's objectively not the case. But you have to fight that status quo advantage that the other folks have. And so, you know, part of doing that is pointing out, first of all, of course, that climate change is very unsafe. And then the way that you do that effectively, we find, is to localize the effects of climate change, talking more about, you know, the wildfires in BC to British Columbians, or the, you know, the floods in Ontario to Ontarians. That's definitely something that's effective. But you also need to build a positive case for why this is safer, right? So that's why, you know, the status quo is unsafe. But here's also, you know, what adds safety to this accelerated energy transition, in that it creates all of these jobs in the clean energy sector. Some of you may have seen the report we put out in May, which, again, very earned media focused report, got a lot of earned media, you know, pretty much across the country. You know, creating the sense of, you know, we can't just talk about the opportunity, we need to talk about the reality of the clean energy sector, right? So, you know, you can't just say, well, the clean energy sector is this nice idea that, you know, this utopian future. You need to point out this is already a real big thing today, because that's something people want to hold on to. And then, you know, when you talk about, say, electric cars, you're talking about how they're going to save people money on fuel costs. And really, this electric car is kind of like the car that you already drive, except that it's, you know, newer and better and shinier and saves you money on gas and doesn't smell. And, you know, you're kind of a sucker if you don't have an electric car in a few years. So, like, these aren't messages that necessarily are required for every activist, or some activists don't even like, probably. But for your average Canadian, we find these are very effective. And that's where Clean Energy Canada on the communications side comes into the spectrum, right? We're trying to convince average Canadians to get on board, to support climate policy, and fundamentally to support an accelerated energy transition. So that is the frame in which I'm talking about this, and what our goals here are on Facebook. So earlier this year, over 3 months, we basically continued doing what we always did, which is boosting posts, Facebook posts to Canadians, but we decided to do a couple things. One, to measure a 3-month period in terms of the data that we were seeing. And also when we're advertising, to just advertise to the same audience over and over and over again. And because carbon pricing was very much in the news at the time, we created an audience of moderates, and we defined that as basically swing ridings that would be conservative or other. Again, this was mid-January to, I guess, mid-April. This is when carbon pricing was going to court. This is when it was tax season, so people were getting their carbon tax incentive rebates as well. So that's kind of like the time context. It also misses some things. Like, we didn't talk as much about like Canadian climate events, I think, as we could have at this point in time. It was in the middle of winter. So, that's something that since then we've seen good results on, that it's not really reflected here just because of the time of the measuring. And basically the way that we did this is we, to capture these swing ridings, is we spent a few hours getting all the postal codes that overlapped with the swing area. It was about 189. We excluded the Quebec ones. And then we manually input all those postal codes into Facebook. So here are the stories that basically that we talked about. And again, these 5 stories are in support of everything I just talked about. They're trying to, the big picture we're trying to paint for Canadians at a macro level through like lots of earned media and through social media that reaches far and reaches people in moderate ridings. So we talk about electric vehicles quite a lot because we find it highly effective. And as an organization, transportation is one of the focus areas of Clean Energy Canada. We talked about carbon pricing a lot during this period, probably more than we would right now, but it was very much in the news at the time. We talked about climate leadership, which is often examples of other governments or businesses or individuals. So this could be Greta, or this could be Sweden. Those things are similar, I guess. Showing climate leadership and kind of trying to inspire people in that sense. There's obviously energy, so power generation, wind, solar projects, etc. And of course, climate change as well. So those are kind of the areas that support, our story in building like, the safe future. And we measured this in a couple different ways. I'll talk about this quickly because it's a bit in the weeds otherwise. We looked at sort of reach and engagement of like, because basically we posted these things and we targeted them to a specific audience. So the organic reach was a lot of friendlies, is people that already like our page or their friends or what have you. And then the paid reach was more targeted toward these swings, these moderates. So, but we wanted to get a sense of what kind of stories were going viral. So we still looked at the overall numbers, which we found told an interesting story. And that's what we're going to talk about at first, is just the stories that really took off. So the ones that I would say had more virality. And then we also looked at the cost per engagement on just the audience of those swings, because we wanted to also draw some lessons from just more moderate Canadians and kind of cut out our friendlier audience to see what stories were resonating with those more moderate Canadians, and also to break that information down a little bit by like gender and age to look for some patterns there as well. So, based on how we separated sort of this first section of, which stories were going viral or not, we kind of carved it up at different relative to one another. And we determined that, basically of the 116, 9 were extremely high performers, 10 were high performers, etc. I'll talk a little bit about extremely high performers. For us, 6 of the top 9 extremely high performers were related to electric transportation. And interestingly, during this period, it was especially true with like non-cars, so motorcycles, electric motorcycles, an electric excavator, electric airplanes. And we've also observed this with electric ferries as well. Some of the most successful stories of electric ferries. There's a company in Richmond called Corvus that builds charging infrastructure and batteries for electric ferries. People love that story. And of course, stories about electric cars do well too. The next big indicator of success for us after electric transportation was milestone stories. So a milestone might be something like, it could be symbolic, like turning an oil tailings pond, the biggest oil into Western Canada's biggest solar farm. So it could be like that it's a good story. It's like that shift, that transformation, or it could be the biggest X or the most Y. Those kinds of things are just like people get the story in a headline and they're symbolic. Those do really well also. Around carbon pricing, climate change being more expensive than the carbon tax, we found was quite effective. And we also found like if there's Indigenous participation in the story, that it tends to do better as well. It's a good thing, and people seem to like that. So that's something that also helps with performance. Here was our #1 performer over this period, not our #1 performer this year, but in this period, it was a story, I didn't see this one coming, but just Ducati's electric motorcycle reached almost 140,000 people with, you know, about 10,000 engagements. Quickly, I'll talk about the high performers here. 5 out of 10 were in about the carbon tax during this period, which is unexpected. We didn't, you know, carbon tax is often framed as like a communications loser, and in some ways it is. It's certainly hard to explain to people, but we wanted to, you know, this was an important time for the carbon tax, and we wanted to find some messages that worked around it. And, you know, some that we saw was this idea of listening to experts on this as opposed to like politicians. And by politicians, we especially mean Doug Ford. Doug Ford was a very useful kind of counter when arguing for the carbon pricing, So here's, you know, one example of this. This one's a good example because if you recall, I think it was in January, Doug Ford said that the carbon tax would cause a recession, and then like every economist in Canada refuting him on Twitter saying that's not true, including the authors of the study that he supported. So, you know, we decided, working with Abacus, to do a poll basically asking Canadians, among other things, you know, do you believe Doug Ford when he says this? And then do you believe the number of economists who said otherwise? And not surprisingly, people didn't believe Doug Ford overwhelmingly. So we ran that poll. Then that poll, we pitched it. It got a little bit of media coverage. In this case, it's HuffPost story you can see here. And then we took that story that essentially we had helped create by doing the poll, and we posted on Facebook, and then we boosted it, and it did really well. So that was an example, I think, of a tactic from like, you know, A to Z succeeding, and at a critical time. So, you know, again here, this was using the idea that like, you know, actually the experts think this is a great idea, and it's just, you know, politicians playing political games. That's the only reason they're refuting it. In terms of poor performers, this is corporate leadership stories perform poorly. I'll qualify that a little bit. It's more that's not all, like a story about a automotive company shifting its fleet to electric doesn't necessarily do poorly, but a story about like Walmart buying a bunch of renewable energy, or Starbucks buying renewable energy, those bombed. People don't really, I guess, sympathize with corporations buying renewable energy. Stories about climate change can be poor performers, but I think what I would add to that is international stories about climate change are often poor performers, but the localized ones can do quite well and resonate with people a lot more. We didn't have much luck with social postcards this year, less so in the past. I know certain pages do. I think it's partly our voice. Like, you know, we don't run the kind of postcards that like North 99 might or something. You know, ours tend to be a bit more tame, I guess. So for us, we find increasingly social postcards are not too effective on Facebook. They do well on Twitter still. And yeah, and also when we were communicating with the climate action incentive, which is the carbon tax rebate, it just bombs. And in focus groups too, when you try to explain it to people, it was very difficult for them to understand how the carbon tax worked with the rebate. So here's an example of a poor performer. I mentioned Starbucks, and this one did not do well. Here's a video quickly. So video, normally we paid costs, we were paying for engagements on Facebook, but for video we paid for 10-second views. And the one thing I'll say on video is to get your points, get your argument across in 10 seconds, and also make sure it shows up in text. Because so many people do drop off after 10 seconds. And like, if you create a video where, you know, you feel like your mission isn't accomplished unless somebody watches it to the end, you know, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. You need to just accept that, to a degree, I think on Facebook, it's helpful to accept that people don't have the best attention spans. But if you get across a key message in 10 seconds, and you can literally pay for 10-second views on Facebook, you know, then you don't need to view the fact that somebody dropped out your video halfway through, which is extremely common. You don't need to view that person as sort of a loss because you didn't say what you needed to say in the first 10 or 15 seconds, right? So say what you need to say early so that you still get a message to them, even if they drop off. That's our philosophy anyways. So now we also looked at, like I said, we looked at performance just among the people we targeted, which were like the moderates in these ridings. So the next couple slides are just in reference to them. And among them, overall, we saw higher male engagement. And young men were particularly engaged with stories about electric vehicles. I'm going to come back to that on the next slide. Women we saw were more engaged with climate stories with climate strikes, Greta Thunberg. Carbon pricing stories normally skewed heavily male. In our experience here, 32% female engagement. But we find that it's not good enough to stop there, right? Because if you package something in a different frame, it's probably inherently already packaged in one frame. If you package something in a different frame, you can change that. So, you know, one story, a couple of headlines here with examples. When it was a story about climate change is more expensive than climate change is more expensive than a carbon tax, you see 44% engagement. That's significantly up from the average of 32%, because now it's compared against climate change. And then another one here, this is an op-ed that we actually wrote for the Globe and Mail, saying that denying solutions is the new climate change denial, which was not just about the carbon tax, but half about the carbon tax, and actually more women than men engaged in that one. The idea of climate denial is like this visceral thing that engaged people. In terms of age analysis, we found pretty much across the board, and this is, I think, maybe a Facebook thing in part, that older women were far more engaged than younger women, especially 65 plus women. And while most stories skew older, that was, I think, what a promising thing with electric vehicles is, yes, while they did skew quite male, I think what was interesting is they skewed very heavily 25 to 44. And that is often considered a strategic demographic to be reaching. And while most stories skew older, it's interesting to see that our most effective storage in terms of raw numbers was disproportionately popular with younger Canadians, though admittedly male, disproportionately male as well. So electric vehicles are an incredibly effective message for reaching 25 to 45-year-olds, men especially, but I think women as well to an extent. And yeah, political stories tend to skew older as well. So evoking Doug Ford carbon pricing, even when they do well, you get pretty old audiences. So just a couple takeaways here, then I'm done. Obviously, electric vehicles, very effective, especially non-cars, ferries, buses, that sort of thing, do fantastic. They always have for us. Again, this is our brand, our audience. Symbolic milestones, the best X ever. Indigenous participation, we think, is always a positive factor in a story, and it really does help its performance as well. And then we're talking about carbon pricing, and again, I know we're not really talking about carbon pricing so much anymore, but invoking expert consensus is an effective move in our opinion. Using Doug Ford as the figurehead of the anti-carbon tax movement. The cost of climate change is being worse is a good argument for people as well. And real world examples of other countries that have done carbon pricing where it's worked. And do not spend too much time trying to explain how the policy works, how a price signal works. It's abstract, especially when you get into the rebate. People really get confused. And I'm saying this not just based on our social media experience here, but also based on carbon pricing focus groups we ran earlier this year. So that's our quick rundown on talking about carbon pricing. Last thing I'll say is ultimately Facebook is a story medium. And maybe I think this way because I come from a publishing background, but in terms of performance, you know, your story matters, the story you're sharing matters more than the message. So don't just think, oh, this is a good key message and then post the key message on Facebook. It's not gonna work. People don't wanna share key messages. They wanna share good stories. So find those good stories, identify which kind of stories resonate with people and the people you're trying to reach, and then strap the key message that you want to say on top of that story, or share a story that has that key message baked into it. So I haven't been tracking the time, so I will stop there.
Thanks, Trevor. I think we are going back to How-Sen. Yeah, there he is.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks so much, Trevor. I'm going to play. So Trevor went a bit into, well, not a bit, he went into a lot into what Clean Energy Canada has been doing on Facebook and social messaging. They use Facebook primarily as a showing because that's their goal, right? Their goal isn't to build activists. It's not to engage people necessarily into going to an event or something. It's just to send them a message. And so how they're using Facebook is an excellent way of using social networking. They're not doing a lot to kind of find new people or like engage people, just showing it, and the natural virability of Facebook posts and the posts they're doing is doing a lot of that stuff for them. Meanwhile, because it's a interactive medium, people are clicking, people are actually engaging, even though that's not necessarily what Clean Energy Canada is optimizing their stuff for. That engagement is giving them information that they know, hey, this is more popular, this isn't, these are the types of things that are working, these ones aren't, right? For every organization, it's going to look slightly different. There are some general rules, kind of, right? Like environmentalists are going to like, good stories about the environment and that type of stuff in general. But, if you have a more activist group, then maybe your group is going to be more fired up by like naming a particular politician or a particular government or a particular company to shame, right? And Clean Energy Canada has some of that information and found that out. That was actually the case with the Doug Ford government, even though that's not necessarily the main message that they're trying to push out. Let's switch. So skills you should be looking for when you're doing social media and you're finding people to manage your social media. There's a lot of short form writing. So a lot of people call this commercial writing. Basically, how do you, the equivalent of writing headlines and billboards in very, very short text, because that's the nature of a lot of the online social media. There is more long form social media, things like Medium, which will allow you to write a long form article. Every once in a while, when you write a long form article or blog and post that, it does well as well. But you shouldn't necessarily think about that as part of your social media strategy. That is part of your overall goal. And then your social media strategy should be used to push that as a goal. So if you want a lot of people to read a particular report that you've done, you should be using your social media to broadcast that report and make sure that more and more people read that report rather than using the report as your social media campaign. So a lot of basic graphics and basic video management you should be looking for as well, and also you should be looking for either building up yourself or finding somebody who can take a lot of grace in their fire. There is a lot of terrible things that happen online. I used to work at Stand.Earth. A lot of you might know the types of attacks that Zipporah Berman's been getting. I have read a lot of them personally. They are not worth repeating anywhere, but they're very, very bad. And so understanding and having a strategy on that with your social media should be very important as well. How are you going to respond and react when terrible things like that actually occur? I also want to talk a little bit about graphics and video. Some organizations have graphics and video in-house. Some people have it kind of as a side gig. Some organizations hire outside organizations or outside contractors to do it. It's pretty obvious why you should have some good graphics skills in your organization, or contract to your organization. Really, you've heard a picture says 1,000 words, right? And so that's really what it is. And a video is 60 individual pictures every second. So that gives you a good good view as to like how much information that you can do. Now, as a result though, it can be difficult to find really good people to do these graphics, and it's a learning process. I'm still okay at it. I'm not great. But as time goes on, I get a little bit better and better. So graphics and videos is definitely going to help you and your message compete with the noise of the outside world. Here's a bunch of tools you can use. I won't get too much into this because I want to leave enough time for questions. But you should be looking for skills for people. So when you're looking for people to actually do your graphics, then you should be looking for people who are experienced in visual storytelling, people who are experienced in short text copywriting, people who understand basic image and text rules, and people who understand rhythm and cadence when they're doing video editing as well. And on the right here is a photo that I found on Reddit, which is pretty illustrative of what happens when basic graphic design knowledge is not available. The message can literally be the complete opposite. It's supposed to read, "You matter, don't give up." But as it's laid out, it looks a lot like "You don't matter, give up." When you put everything together, your work should be functioning around primarily a CRM if you are building a list. If you're not building a list, this doesn't necessarily matter for you, but if you are building a list at all with supporters for any reason, you do need a CRM. An emailer is very, very basic, and then you can use the graphics and video to put the content out to the digital engagement tools, the social networks, and you can see on the right-hand side here with the social networks, when you bring content out to the social networks, you can get data back. Some of that data can go into your engagement rules, some of your engagement tools. Some of that data can go straight to your CRM. It depends on how you engage those people on social media. For someone like Clean Energy Canada, they're not really that interested in engagement because they are more of a telling and a show and tell type of organization. So that data that they use only is really there to help them optimize their messaging back into the social network. So they're not really, list building isn't their primary thing, but for some organizations, list building is, for many different reasons. I'm going to do a couple of case studies quick. These are some of these are actual organizations and movements, and some of them aren't. The first one is happening starting this week, which is the climate strike. This is a mass mobility case study. This is a mass mobility movement. It's basically a hashtag. So it's not really centrally organized. There's no single organizing structure. It's primarily organized by hashtag and using influencers like Greta Thunberg. And the goal is to get people to go out and strike, because their theory of change is the more people that go out and strike, the more likely we're going to have massive amounts of large amounts of climate action. And so their strategies are graphics and video tools and social networking, engaging like-minded organizations. Organizations like 350 and Greenpeace are getting people out there. Big organizing and is a term used to basically have an organization not based off of paid staff, but most of the people doing the organizing are actually volunteers. And the volunteers are training other volunteers and organizing everyone else. So that's the big organizing strategy. It's also sometimes known as the snowflake model. And then there's like the get to the event strategy. So these are strategies of like reminding people when the event's happening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Notice that like there's no one database for this. There's no one organization managing this. It's just a thing that's grown. And this is the type of like thing that can occur now with in the digital world that we live in. Voter engagement is another case study. So say you want to identify environmental voters, get them to debates and get them to the polls. Your strategies could be, first you need to identify environmental voters. So you can use social media strategies to do that. You can call them and identify an existing list. You can get them we want to get them to debates, and so you may want to get people to RSVP and then remind them about the actual event, and then you may want to get them to the polls as well. So you have to remind them, hey, election day is today, are you going to go out and vote, and make sure that they do that, right? And this voter engagement strategy is all about getting the numbers out to the polls and getting people to vote and getting people to debates. And so it's short term, and it's very, very based off of getting people physically to point A. And then you have like one organization potentially here's an issue engagement. So if the goal is to get an issue out into the general zeitgeist, your strategies might be to engage journalists. You may want to interview them or email their lists or send them press releases. I know there are some organizations that are sending targeted ads specifically to journalists on Facebook, so people who identify as journalists. So you can actually do that if you want. There's broadcast strategies, boosting earned media, publishing videos, and there's supporter engagement. So getting those people who do support you to share posts, share with their friends in order to get these ideas out there a little bit more. We're basically at the end here. Just going to go quickly over what's next. The general trends, where are we going with digital campaigning? General trends are going to likely continue. There's going to be more engagement over mobile. There's going to be more graphic and video engagement as attention spans continue to fall and more people have access to those tools. More micro-targeting because of artificial intelligence, and publishing tools will continue to propagate more amateurs, and more amateurs will become popular. Some of the challenges, though, is there's going to be continued echo chambers, and there's going to be continued rapid evolution of digital space. So just trying to keep up is a major challenge. One of the main things that we've been seeing is that young people aren't using Facebook as much. They're primarily in Snapchat and Instagram, and so it's more challenging to get them to do an online engagement. We do find that they, respond to texts pretty well, but a lot of the systems that we're currently using, that a lot of organizations are built on email lists, and that's already challenging. One of the things that we didn't really talk that much about is the rise of social media influencers. Increasingly, there are people with massive followings. This on the right is Lily Singh. She has 35 or 36 million followers. She's the most popular YouTuber in Canada, and she now has an NBC late night show. So she was only popular on YouTube. I had never heard of her before about 5 months ago. But she apparently has always been one of the most popular people on the planet, but a lot of us had never heard of her before because she only worked on, the only people who knew her on YouTube. 5 of the top 10 YouTubers in 2018 were video game players. And then brands already work with top social media influencers. They pay tens of thousands of dollars for mentions and product placement on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I've seen some of these tools. It kind of blew my mind how easily brands can use certain tools to get to social media influencers. There are now tools out there that track social media influencers and post what they charge for a post on Instagram, for example. And then also there's going to be more episode content, right? Conventional media in Canada is now investing in podcasting. There's going to be more Netflix and all these types of things, all these types of new TV programs. Disney's coming out with one. And engagement with the producers of these shows has been relatively untapped in our world. So we're going to open up to questions now. If you have any questions, please put them in. And one of the questions I have for you, and you may want to answer to me in the chat, is what would you like to take home? I'm putting together a document that you can take home with you, maybe a cheat sheet or something like that. Let me know what you would like for me to put in that document that would be helpful for you, and put that in the chat. And notice that I just did for you was a call to action, which is one of the key things that you should be learning with digital tools. Always end with a call to action. So yeah, open things up to question now.
Thanks, How-Sen, and thanks, Trevor. So yeah, any questions, just post them in the Q&A. We have one question here to start from Simone. TikTok is gaining more and more following. There's a decent amount of discourse about VSCO girls, people who stand for environmental justice through fashion, sort of, I guess. Do you predict more organizations will be moving into TikTok?
I am unaware exactly of how TikTok works. And so you can build brands into TikTok. So I do think that is possible. I know how TikTok works, but I don't know. I have yet to see a very good brand usage of TikTok. So organizations and brands using TikTok, I haven't really seen that yet. TikTok is very similar to, what was it, Vine beforehand, where it's a bunch of people sharing really short videos. It's like Instagram for videos. And so if there is a natural way that the TikTok community will start engaging with brands and organizations, then the answer is yes, but I'm not certain that's going to happen.
I would say yes, just based on having teenagers in my house. My 14-year-old daughter watches TikTok all the time, and all her peers do. Like, I think it's probably one of the most popular emerging platforms for youth. So I would anticipate this will get populated soon too, in the same way that Instagram has in recent times.
Yeah.
That's my guess. And Vanessa just agreed here in the chat. She said, if you aren't paying attention to TikTok, this is a missed opportunity. Less about brands, more about influencers and talking to Gen Z.
Yeah, and this is what I mean, right? Like, I guess, like, that's a good point, Vanessa, about the influencers that I hadn't thought about before, right? That really is, like, the future of influencers is something that we haven't really done a lot of as a movement. And a lot of these services that the youth are using don't really have a natural system or structure for kind of me to come in as an organization to sell something to them. But there is potentially a lot of influencer payback, right? So I think you're right there, and I think you made a connection there that I hadn't before about how TikTok is used with even my own presentation. So kudos to you. That's great.
Yeah, Vanessa just added students in Ontario are making videos about cuts to education. Yeah, I've seen those too, since I'm also in Ontario. Are there any other questions?
I see something from Andrea.
Oh, I wonder, oh, there it is. Would you say having an Instagram account for environmental nonprofits like Iron and Earth is important? We use Facebook and Twitter, or do you think we should use Instagram as well?
Yeah, Instagram is one of the most popular social media platforms for those under the age of 30. And so basically there's a lot of young adults who are using it now, and it is pretty important to use. I haven't, I don't understand Instagram at an innate level. I understand it at how it works and all that type of stuff, but I personally don't use Instagram nearly as much as I use Facebook. And that's not a weird thing, because there is a lot of kind of balkanization of Facebook, of social media platforms, right? Those who use Facebook tend to be older, and I'm starting to become that group of people, and those who use Instagram tend to be younger. This is one of the reasons why I also talked a little bit about video and image production, because a lot of these types of popular social media platforms that young people are using are primarily image and video based. And as a result, like, you don't have to make absolutely perfect images and videos and stuff like that, but it is an area that is only going to grow with time, partly because it is a far more natural way to communicate with photos and with video for a lot of people. So yeah, absolutely. I think Instagram, at the very least, if not TikTok and the other ones, is somewhere that most organizations should look into working. I haven't found the perfect way of doing it yet. I can, if you want me to go into some Instagram strategies, I can put that into the take home if you'd like as well. A lot of them are like hashtag based and things like that. It doesn't allow for the same level of engagement and interaction that Facebook might have, for example, but it is still a very important social media platform that's used by an increasingly large number of people.
I can jump in quickly on that one, just because we started doing it about a year ago. And, I would say that it's kind of the, like, we wouldn't do Snapchat or TikTok or anything like that. We don't really speak to teenagers. But with Instagram, it's a lot of millennials. I would say I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'd even say it's like under 40. It's pretty popular. And it's not, it's not nearly as big as Facebook, and it's not reaching the influencers and the journalists that we reach on Twitter. But the numbers are good enough that it's worth the time for us, right? Like, we were doing LinkedIn for a while, and we abandoned that because the numbers were abysmal. But it took, like, Facebook and Twitter are definitely different, but even they're more similar in the types of stories that will succeed on them than Instagram is. like Instagram and our experience is the most dissimilar. And like, because I mean, news stories, for example, do well on both, you know, Facebook and Twitter, and it's not really a thing on Instagram, right? It's not a newsy platform. It's a visual platform. And so like it was actually somebody who hired a year ago, and she kind of wanted to take another crack at it, and kind of conceived of a visual, like a visual repetitive style. I mean repetitive in a good way, a consistent style for Clean Energy Canada. So it even looks like, you know, good at a glance when you look at all the tiled images. So like now we have a consistent aesthetic. We don't ever post a bad image. Like everything needs to look good. And sometimes we have text on the image, but it's just like, it's a clear message in like 7-8 words. So, I mean, that's worked for us. Now we're getting engagement numbers and posts that are often in the hundreds, you know, which is not like stellar for Instagram, but it's pretty good. And it's worth our time. So we found it to be worth it. And I say that as an organization that is not youth focused. So for us, like Instagram is kind of somewhere halfway between, you know, Facebook and Snapchat.
Yeah, like I would say for an organization like Iron and Earth, because there's quite a few young workers in Alberta, that Instagram probably is a good place for you to invest some resources in terms of social media. There are a lot of younger folks who work in the oil sands. Andrew's asking like what types of content you can post. A lot of the content that I've seen do well on Instagram are these kinds of report back storytelling types of things. These are the things that we've done, right? So whereas like you do a lot of news posting, a lot of folks post things like news and stuff, news articles and things on Facebook and Twitter. Instagram really is about telling your own story. And so that could be your organization story, or it could be a particular person within your organization story. You can tell stories of people who are like working in the oil sands, for example, who've moved over to Iron and Earth. Those all work. Have you ever seen People of New York, I think it's called?
Humans of New York, yeah.
Humans,
it's the Humans of New York site, yeah.
Right, Humans of New York. And Humans of New York, basically it's that kind of process where all you're doing is you're telling a story. So they're not going for engagements. A lot of times with, you know, Facebook news articles, you're going for shares and engagements. But in this case, it's really about storytelling. And then what I would do with those photos is find the hashtags you want to be associated with, and you want your organization or that particular post to be associated with that are in Instagram. Find those and then make sure that hashtag is in there. So what you're doing is discoverable by people who are following those hashtags.
That's great. We have one more question here. Oh, that's cool. They're developing a Humans of the Oil Fields series of photos, so that sounds perfect. So we have one more question here before we wrap up from Vanessa. Our organization doesn't run campaigns. We work directly with municipal governments on climate action. We don't really engage the public, i.e. we're not looking to gain support of any kind of campaign. We maintain a digital presence because it gives us legitimacy and allows us to spread some of our work. But our engagement is low. Any tips? We don't use Facebook, only Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
I'd have to think a little bit more about that. So if what your main goal is to engage municipalities, then if you're engaging with politicians, they are sensitive to what the public thinks. And so it may be worth investing a little bit on that, maybe, if you're finding that you're at an impasse. But if you're engaging with like non-political policymakers, then what I would use social media for would be probably what you're already doing, which is as a broadcast medium. And so if you're doing reports, or you can talk about, like similar with the Instagram, you can talk about the types of successes that your organization has had, or like how one municipality has done well. You might be able to build an online following, for example, of people who are policymakers amongst amongst in municipalities. And so if you make that very, very clear with your social media, and if you make your social media campaign about building, say your social media is like, says something about like, we are a community of policymakers for municipalities, and then your social media is about those successes and those challenges, that might be something that could work out for you if you don't want to go the route of building activists instead.
And Amber just added, Amber just added here that the Efficiency Canada campaign of working with industry around energy efficiency might also have some inspiration. They may have some lessons to learn that they can share.
Yeah, I'm not personally familiar with that campaign, but really like what I would say is, if you're not quite sure, always start with the audience, right? Who is it that you're trying to convince? And then when you start with the audience, then you can start going like, all right, what are the strategies I can do to make this audience do what it is that I want them to do, to make the change that I want in the world? And then don't start with the tool first, start with the audience. And when you start with the audience, everything else can start coming in and building on your theory of change.
I would also question.
So related to that, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, Trevor.
I was just saying, with knowing nothing about the initiatives you're working on, I would question the decision to not be on Facebook, and just point out that it's the one social platform that everybody is on. If Twitter, it's something like a third of Canadians are on it, and there was a study like the average Twitter user spends like a minute a day on the platform. It's way higher for Facebook. We did some napkin math on it once, and we found out that basically, in terms of like time spent on the respective platforms, Canadians spend 100 times more like minutes on Facebook than they do on Twitter. So I think it's easy when you're in that Twitter echo chamber to think that it's bigger, and it is influential in its way, but like Facebook is the default. And no matter what your organization does, your people are on Facebook.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. You should be building a Facebook page. The question is, what are you building the Facebook page for? And if you're not building for activists, then maybe it's about storytelling in a way kind of similar to what Trevor's doing at CEC, but rather than like kind of the general population, you're going for policymakers, for example.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question here because we're just about at time. And for all of the viewers who are still on here, we have recorded today's session and we will be posting it to our website as usual. We'll also be posting follow-up materials and resources in the members only portal on the Climate Action Network website. And if you don't yet have access to that and would like access, you can always contact me. So I'm Tika Newton at climateactionnetwork.ca. Okay, one final question. Take home, what does a good buyer persona look like for people willing to act on environmental and climate events?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by buyer persona? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I think a target audience, I'm pretty sure that's what he means by that. Like if you're trying to think of who the optimal person is that you're advertising to or that you're trying to reach on social media to ensure that they're motivated and will act.
I mean, I don't look at it as there being one type of climate activist. I look at it as there being multiple types of climate activists. And so it's a matter of what kinds of climate activists do you want to engage with or do you want to communicate with? And so, like, do you want to communicate like what CEC is doing? It's more people who are interested in like the actual transition and the technology around it. Some people are more of the corporate campaigners, like the anti-corporate road. Some of them are more of the from the justice. And so based off of that, you would see what types of engagements would actually and messages would work for those groups of people, right? So right now, climate is a big issue. A lot of people want to be climate activists, but they're not quite sure. And because there's such a large number of climate activists, there's no one caricature of what a climate activist is. And so ultimately, it's about like, if what you're trying to do is stop climate change, that is not that is not a precise enough theory of change. And so what I would recommend that you do is look at like, what is the way that I think my organization is going to help stop climate change? How, and then once you do that, you can start figuring out, all right, well then what is the group of people that is most able to do that for us, or do that? And then your strategy on digital media would be based off of that, right? So it seems as if what I would recommend in this case is go kind of step back a little bit and be like, all right, well, I want to stop climate change, yes, but how do I want to stop climate change, right? Remember that climate change is not a problem. It's actually it's actually a end product of a series of different problems. And so it's just something that we call climate change, but ultimately it's, injustice, and it's pollution, and it's over consumption, and it's all these different types of things. And so based off of that, I would say, see how you can break down climate change into something that works for your organization, and then build your audience and your digital strategy around that.
Trevor, last word to you.
Last word. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just said there. And for us, obviously, the story is often an opportunity. And I mean, it's not even that there are a range of climate change activists. There are a range of people who care about climate change. And it is like 3/4 of Canadians. And so, yeah, not every message is going to work well for everyone, and different audiences are going to engage differently. And so one message that might work well for one audience would actually alienate another, like within the spectrum of people who care about climate change. So, I guess know your audience and act accordingly. And sometimes experience I had we did this focus groups. We had this pitch thing we did where I would give a pitch to try to get people to support an accelerated transition. Again, these are all moderates, people that are on the fence about climate action. And then somebody else would give a counterfoil to try to take me down. And what we were trying to test was resiliency, inoculation, right? Like, can my pitch survive the counter pitch? And so on day one, I tried something that was a bit more CEC brand. Day 3, I nailed it. But day two, I decided to make a pitch that was most similar to how I personally felt about climate change, what I personally felt was compelling. And I talked about all the people that would be displaced in Bangladesh. I described what heat death was like. I described how truly, I have a moral philosophy degree, how like from that utilitarian perspective, how bad climate change was. And it bombed so hard. It was by far the least effective pitch. Everyone just tuned out, right? It was just international problems. It's just, it's not that they don't care, but it just does not set. And then when I went to Kamloops the other day, and I talked to my cab driver on the way over to the focus group and had him tell me stories about the wildfire smog that had descended over the cities, and how you couldn't open your window, and how he said you felt like a prisoner within your own home. And when I started talking to the group about that, everybody was nodding. They took over the conversation. They talked about their own experiences. So what I'll say is, remember that what's convincing to you and what's convincing to your friends may not be what's convincing to your audience. And it's good to check that.
Thanks so much to both of you. This was a fantastic webinar, and we're really grateful. So thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.